Hello, this is Mrs. Morris, and I'm going to go through some of the links and connections that we find in Hulls with the help of some pupils who submitted some work. So we're starting off with a lovely cartoon here from Jack, which more or less summarises the whole story. So we're going to start off with Stanley and Zero, and obviously they are connected because of their family histories, with Madame Zeroni being Zero's great-grandmother and Elia being Stanley's great-great-grandfather. So by coincidence, they both ended up in the same area, and we know this because Zero used to live in the park that Stanley used to go to. And obviously, they must have been in quite close proximity to each other for Stanley to have caught the shoes that Zero had actually stolen. And they also, interestingly enough, both ended up coming from Latvia, both ended up in the same part of America. So not only did they emigrate to America, but they actually both went to Texas. They also both know the song, the one about If Only, If Only. And again, we know that because when Zero finds his mum, right at the end, in fact, the very last sentence, I think, of the book, his mum sings that song to him. And here we can see some work from Alicia and Zoe, and you'll see it looks very similar. It's not exactly the same, but there's lots of shared ideas there. And that's not a coincidence. They've actually been working together using FaceTime, which I think is a fantastic idea, because obviously you're used to doing group work at school, and it's really nice to be doing that when you're working at home as well, because it makes it a little bit more interesting for you. Both of them then came up with this bit where it says Stanley and Zero both were part of Clyde Livingston's sneakers robbery. I thought that was quite original, actually. I hadn't really thought about that actually they must have both been in the same sort of location as well for that to happen. So mountains are very important. Elia carries the pig up the mountain to get the love of Myra Menke because he wants the pig to grow big. He was supposed to carry Madame Zeroni up the mountain, but obviously he didn't, which is why he's the dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather. Obviously, when he does then carry Zero up the mountain, then that breaks the curse. And also there's a reference to God's thumb. So Stanley's great-great-grandfather, sorry, not great-great-grandfather, great-grandfather, so there was the first Stanley Yelnats, he was only a son, survived with the help of God's thumb, which is obviously a mountain, although nobody really knows how that happened. There's also a connection that two people are teachers. So Catherine Barlow is obviously a professional teacher, but Stanley is a teacher, and he teaches Zero how to read. And there's a number of consequences of that. So because Stanley's teaching Zero how to read, the other boys get jealous because Zero is digging Stanley's hole, and that leads to then a series of events. And also it means that Zero can read Stanley Yelnats's name on the suitcase before the warden can take it away, which is how they both become rich, because Stanley hasn't actually noticed the name on the suitcase, but Zero has. And here we've got a lovely model done by Stanley in 710TR, which is actually for homework. It wasn't part of the home learning. And holes obviously terribly important because they're digging holes for treasure. Troutwort tries to make Kate dig up the treasure, and then obviously you've got the digging for water up on Big Thumb. Peaches is another thing that comes up again and again. And I found this lovely picture actually on Google Images of Sploosh, kissing Kate. Sploosh, it's her spiced peaches. So she makes the best spiced peaches in Green Lake. Zero finds the spiced peaches under the boat, but obviously they're 100 years old by this time. He calls it Sploosh. Stanley's father then invents a cure for foot odours, that's smelly feet, which also smells of peaches, and he calls it Sploosh. Clyde Livingston, who's otherwise known as Sweetfeet, has got smelly feet, and he advertises Sploosh. There's another connection. Also, Trout Walker, if you remember, has also got smelly feet. And moving from peaches to onions. Obviously, onions are a cure. These are very special onions. So there's a very small scene where Mrs. Tennyson's daughter has eaten some bad meat. She gets food poisoning, and the onion juice cures her. And the same thing, the same cure is then applied to Zero, and Zero recovers when Stanley gives him some raw onions when they've climbed up to Big Thumb. And then we've got this thing with Stanley Yelnats, which is that he survived 3 weeks without food or water, and we don't know how. And the suggestion is that he also must have been eating onions, because we know the onion field is obviously on Big Thumb, which is the same as God's Thumb. And this is another very small scene, which you may or may not remember. So Jesse, Walter and Bo, not important characters, but they're going rattlesnake hunting, and they come to Sam, who gives them some onion juice to keep away the lizards, because he says yellow-spotted lizards can't bear the smell of onions. And that scene also comes up with Stanley and Zero, because when they're in the hole and the lizards are climbing all over them, no one can understand why they're not being bitten, and it's obviously because they've been eating raw onions for the best part of a week. Water is terribly important throughout holes, right from the beginning. So there's the bit at the beginning where Elia is supposed to carry the pig to the top of the mountain to make it grow big and strong, to be the biggest pig, and obviously he misses the last trip, which is why it's the same weight as the other pig. He's also supposed to carry Madame Zeroni up there, and he doesn't do that, which obviously leads to the family curse. He then does carry Zero up the mountain, and they find the water. The curse is then lifted. The other type of water is obviously the water in the lake, which is where Sam drowns, but there's obviously no water in the lake at the moment. There's no rain. The water truck is really important, because the boys rely on that to bring them water every day while they're out digging. And we get this incident, obviously, after the warden has slapped Mr. Sir's face with her fingernails wet from the rattlesnake venom nail varnish. And Mr. Sir starts messing about with the water, and he won't give Stanley the water. When Stanley and Zero ran away, they obviously have to return to camp to get water. Everybody's thirsty all of the time, and finally, when the curse is lifted, it starts to rain. This is part of a actually much longer presentation by Jake, and I couldn't use it because of the animations. It was causing me a problem, but it was lovely piece of work. Obviously, Mary Lou, it's one of the jokes actually in Holes, that when the boys find the boat, or rather when they're sheltering under the boat, they imagine that Mary Lou is the name of the girl, and they imagine what she might have looked like in a bikini. And the reader obviously knows that Mary Lou is donkey, which is where the joke comes in. The link between Trav Walker and the warden. Now, in the book, this is quite subtle. If you have not read the book and you've watched the film when it came to the end, it's done in a slightly different way, and the warden's actually called Linda. We don't know that. She's not called Linda in the book. She's actually descended from Trout Walker. That's pretty obvious, because the first time we find out is right at the end, when Stanley's lawyer refers to her as Miss Walker, and the warden has also just before that told the councillors that she had to dig holes every weekend and holiday, even at Christmas. Now, the other link is she's got red hair, and Trout Walker's wife, who is actually called Linda. She was actually called Linda Miller before she got married. She'd been a pupil at Miss Catherine's school, and she is described as having been a cute freckle-faced girl with beautiful red hair. So it's quite clear that these are her ancestors. Trout Walker obviously had smelly feet as well, but no peaches. And a slide here from Bella from 7CBS. And I'm going to let you read this on your own, but this is a more detailed explanation of the various links with Kate Barlow, with Catherine Barlow, with the rest of the story, and why she's so important. This isn't really a link, it's more of a twist in the plot. But when Zero runs off and has effectively disappeared, the warden becomes very concerned that she'll get into trouble for losing a prisoner or possibly having a prisoner die. So she asks Mr. Pendanski to wipe Zero from all the computer records, which he does. This backfires really when the lawyer and the AG turn up, because she then has to release him because there are no records to show that she's entitled to keep him prisoner. She doesn't want him to go because I think she's worried that Zero basically knows too much. The joke is also that the word zero obviously means nothing. This is a lovely piece of work from Lizzie where she's colour coded the various links. So if you look at the clouds at the top, you'll be able to see the colours, what the colours mean. I'm not going to read it to you, but you might want to pause this for a minute just to have a look at that, because it is lovely. Finally, how does Sakhar manage to trick us? Because actually, when we find out the truth about Madame Zeroni, Hector Zeroni, that link's actually pretty obvious. It's pretty obvious the word zero, the name Zero appears inside the name Zeroni, but we don't notice it. So the question is, why not? Well, partly it's to do with the way it's pronounced. So the stress in the name Zero, or the word zero, is on the first syllable, the z. So it's zero, not zero. Whereas with Madame Zeroni, the stress falls on that middle syllable, on the obit. It's Zeroni. And we can link it to to words like macaroni. Also, by having the Madame at the front, it means it doesn't start with the Z in the same way. I think if we were seeing Zeroni and Zero, it would become much more obvious, but the I sees the Madame. Also, by the time we get to Zero, Madame Zeroni actually stops being mentioned. She sort of more or less disappeared from the story. But it's very clever. I know the first time I read the book, I didn't have a clue that there was a relationship until I got quite near the end, really. And I've taught this for many, many years, and I've never come across a pupil who has spotted that link either. Certainly not in the first 2/3 of the book. So the story relies on us not noticing that connection.